The stagecoach wheels kicked up dust as Theresa Vaughn pressed her handkerchief to her lips, trying to shield herself from the grit that seemed to invade everything in this wild country. She had traveled 3,000 miles from Boston, her trunk filled with books in English, French, and Spanish, her mind brimming with determination and her heart heavy with the weight of starting over. The year was 1876, and Hill City, South Dakota, was about to become either her salvation or her greatest mistake. "Miss, we are arriving," the driver called down, and Theresa straightened her traveling dress, smoothing the dusty fabric as best she could. Through the window, she glimpsed wooden buildings that looked barely settled against the harsh landscape, mountains rising in the distance like sleeping giants. This was frontier country, raw and untamed, nothing like the refined streets of Massachusetts, where she had spent her 22 years teaching at a private girls' academy, until scandal had touched her family and forced her westward. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and Theresa gathered her reticule, stepping down onto the packed earth of Hill City's Main Street. Men paused in their work to stare, and she felt their eyes on her like physical touches. She stood straight despite her exhaustion, her dark hair pinned neatly beneath her bonnet, her green eyes taking in everything with careful assessment. "You the teacher?" A portly man with a silver star approached, his expression skeptical. "I am Theresa Vaughn, yes. I responded to the advertisement for an educator." Her voice was clear, cultured, each word precisely enunciated. The sheriff, for that was clearly his role, scratched his beard. "We was expecting someone more experienced looking. And the advertisement said we needed someone who could teach practical skills. This is rough country, miss. Children here need to learn reading and arithmetic, sure, but also survival." Theresa lifted her chin. "I assure you, Sheriff, I am more than qualified. I have extensive teaching experience and I speak 3 languages fluently: English, French, and Spanish. I can teach mathematics, literature, history, geography, and the sciences. I believe education is the foundation upon which civilization is built, even here in what you call rough country." Her declaration, delivered with such confidence, seemed to echo down the street. Several men had gathered, curious about the newcomer, and she saw them exchange glances. Some looked impressed, others doubtful, and a few frankly intimidated by her forthright manner and obvious education. "3 languages," one man muttered. "What use is that out here?" "Quite useful, actually," Theresa replied, turning to face him directly. "There are French trappers, Spanish traders, and of course English speakers throughout these territories. Language is power, gentlemen, and education is the key to prosperity." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Well, miss, I suppose the town council will want to meet you proper. The schoolhouse is that building yonder, though it needs some fixing up. We have not had a teacher in near on 8 months. Last one could not handle the isolation and went back east on the first coach." "I am not the last one," Theresa said firmly. "Now, if you could direct me to lodgings, I would like to settle in and prepare for my duties." As the sheriff led her toward a modest boarding house, Theresa tried not to let her apprehension show. The town was smaller than she had imagined, rougher, and the people here were clearly unused to educated women. But she had burned her bridges in Boston, and there was no going back. She would make this work, no matter what it took. That evening, as she unpacked her trunk in the small room above the general store, Theresa allowed herself a moment of doubt. The walls were thin, the furniture sparse, and through the window she could see the vast wilderness stretching endlessly. She had never felt so alone. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. "Miss Vaughn, the town council is gathering at the saloon. They would like to meet you." Theresa quickly pinned her hair more securely and descended the narrow stairs. The saloon was the largest building in town, she noted, which said something about Hill City's priorities. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of whiskey, but a corner had been cleared and several men sat around a table looking official. "Miss Vaughn, please sit." An older gentleman with kind eyes gestured to a chair. "I am Henry Morrison, mayor of Hill City. These are the council members. We appreciate you making the journey out here, but we need to be certain you understand what teaching in this town entails." "I understand it is a frontier community in need of education," Theresa replied, sitting with perfect posture despite her exhaustion. "It is more than that," Morrison said. "We have children ranging from age 6 to 16 who have had little to no formal schooling. Their parents are miners, ranchers, trappers, merchants. Hard people who have built lives in hard country. They want their children to have opportunities, but they also need them to understand the realities of survival out here. I can teach both academics and practical knowledge," Theresa assured him. "I am adaptable, Mr. Morrison, and I am committed to providing these children with the finest education possible." One of the council members, a gruff man with scarred hands, leaned forward. "You said you speak 3 languages. That true? Perfectly true. Would you like a demonstration?" Without waiting for an answer, Theresa smoothly switched to French, explaining her qualifications, then to Spanish, describing her journey west. When she finished, returning to English, the men were staring at her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. "That is mighty impressive, miss," Morrison said slowly, "but some folk might find it intimidating. We are simple people here." "Education should inspire, not intimidate," Theresa said. "But I understand that change can be unsettling. I promise to be sensitive to the community's needs while still maintaining high standards." The council members conferred quietly among themselves, and Theresa sat patiently, hands folded in her lap, projecting a calm she did not entirely feel. Finally, Morrison nodded. "You have the position, Miss Vaughn. We will provide a small salary, room and board, and supplies for the school. Classes start Monday. That gives you 4 days to prepare." Relief flooded through her, but Theresa merely smiled politely. "Thank you, gentlemen. I will not disappoint you." As she left the saloon, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Theresa stood for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air, letting herself feel a small measure of hope. She could do this. She would do this. "You are the new teacher." The voice was deep, rough, and came from the shadows beside the saloon. Theresa turned sharply, her heart racing. A man stepped into the fading light and her breath caught. He was massive, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the last rays of sun. His hair was dark and fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord. His face was weathered and bearded, his eyes a striking blue-gray that seemed to see right through her. He wore buckskin and furs, and a large knife hung at his belt. He looked like he had stepped out of a story about the wilderness itself. "I am," she managed, forcing her voice to remain steady. "And you are Samuel Preston. Most folk call me Sam." He studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "I live up in the mountains, do some trapping, some hunting, come down to town for supplies every few weeks." "I see. Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Preston?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Theresa became acutely aware of how alone they were on this side of the building, how powerful he looked, how small she felt in comparison. But his eyes, while intense, did not seem threatening. "I have a daughter," he said finally. "She is 9 years old. Her mother died 3 years back, and I have been raising her on my own, teaching her what I can, but—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. She needs more than I can give her, needs learning from books, proper education. I heard there was a new teacher coming, but I also heard some of the men talking just now. Said you speak 3 languages, got all kinds of education. That is correct, Theresa said carefully. Samuel nodded slowly. That is good, real good. My girl Emma, she is smart, quick mind. She deserves better than just knowing how to trap and track. She deserves to know about the world beyond these mountains. He looked directly at Theresa, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression. Some of the men, they seemed intimidated by you, by all that learning you have. But I figure that is exactly what our children need. Someone who can teach them well, teach them everything. Theresa felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening air. This rough mountain man, who looked like he could wrestle bears and probably had, understood the value of education, saw it as a gift for his daughter rather than a threat. I will do my very best for Emma and all the children, Mr. Preston, she said softly. You have my word. Sam, he corrected. And I appreciate that, Miss Vaughn. I will bring Emma to town Monday morning. She is shy around strangers, but she is eager to learn. I look forward to meeting her. Samuel touched the brim of his hat in farewell and disappeared into the gathering darkness as silently as he had appeared. Theresa stood there for several minutes, her mind replaying the encounter. There was something about him, something that made her feel both nervous and strangely safe at the same time. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Theresa threw herself into preparing the schoolhouse, which had indeed fallen into disrepair. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, and organized the meager supplies the town provided. She created lesson plans for multiple age groups, knowing she would have to teach children of varying abilities all in one room. On Sunday, she attended church services in the same building that served as the schoolhouse during the week. The small community gathered, and Theresa felt their curious eyes on her throughout the sermon. After the service, several mothers approached her, introducing themselves and their children. The women were friendly but reserved, clearly waiting to see what kind of teacher this Boston lady would be. My son can be a handful, one woman admitted. He does not take well to sitting still. Many bright children have active minds and bodies, Theresa assured her. I will do my best to keep the lessons engaging. That night, she lay awake, too anxious for sleep. Tomorrow would determine everything. If she failed, there would be nowhere left to run. Monday morning dawned clear and cool. Theresa dressed carefully in a practical navy dress, pinned her hair in a simple bun, and walked to the schoolhouse with her heart pounding. She arrived early, writing the alphabet on the chalkboard in her neat script, arranging primers and slates, trying to calm her nerves. Children began arriving with their parents, shy and curious. Theresa greeted each one warmly, learning names and making mental notes. There were 14 children in total, ranging from little 6-year-old Lucy to strapping 15-year-old Daniel, who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Samuel arrived just as Theresa was about to close the door and begin. Emma Preston clung to her father's hand, a small girl with her father's dark hair and blue-gray eyes. She wore a simple dress that was clean but clearly handmade, and she looked at Theresa with a mixture of hope and fear. Emma, this is Miss Vaughn, Samuel said gently, his large hand resting protectively on his daughter's shoulder. She is going to be your teacher. Hello, Emma, Theresa said, kneeling down to be at the girl's eye level. I am so pleased to meet you. Your father tells me you are very smart and eager to learn. Emma nodded shyly, not speaking. That is wonderful. I think we are going to have a marvelous time together. Would you like to choose where you would like to sit? The girl's eyes brightened slightly, and she nodded again. Samuel squeezed her shoulder encouragingly, and Emma slowly let go of his hand, moving into the schoolroom. Samuel met Theresa's eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. "She will be just fine," Theresa assured him. He nodded but seemed reluctant to leave. "I will be in town most of the day. Need to pick up supplies and such. I will collect her this afternoon. We finish at 3 o'clock. Samuel turned to go, then paused. "Miss Vaughn, if you need anything at all, you let me know, not just for Emma, for any of the children or for yourself. These mountains can be unforgiving, and you are new to this country." "That is very kind of you, Mr. Preston." "Sam," he reminded her, and then he was gone, his buckskin fringe swaying as he walked away. Theresa closed the door and turned to face her students. 14 pairs of eyes stared at her with varying degrees of interest and suspicion. She took a deep breath and smiled. "Good morning, students. Welcome to our school. My name is Miss Vaughn, and I am honored to be your teacher. We are going to learn many wonderful things together this year. Reading, writing, mathematics, history, geography, and so much more. But before we begin, I would like to get to know each of you. Please stand and tell me your name, your age, and one thing you hope to learn this year." The exercise worked beautifully. As each child spoke, Theresa learned not just their names but their personalities, their dreams, their fears. Young Emma, when her turn came, whispered that she wanted to learn to read French like her mother used to know. Theresa's heart clenched at the quiet longing in the girl's voice. "That is a beautiful goal, Emma," Theresa said warmly, "and I promise you will achieve it." The day flew by. Theresa divided the children into groups by ability rather than age, which caused some initial confusion but quickly proved effective. She kept lessons varied and interactive, knowing that children who worked physically alongside their parents needed mental stimulation that went beyond rote memorization. By the time 3 o'clock arrived, she was exhausted but exhilarated. Parents arrived to collect their children, and Theresa made a point of saying something positive about each student. The mothers warmed to her immediately, the fathers remained more reserved. Samuel was the last to arrive, and Emma ran to him with unusual animation, chattering about everything she had learned. "Papa, Miss Vaughn taught us about France, and she spoke in French and it sounded like music, and she said I can learn it just like Mama knew it." Samuel's expression softened as he listened to his daughter, and when he looked at Theresa, there was gratitude in his eyes. "Sounds like you had a good day, little one." "The best day, Papa. I am glad." He looked at Theresa. "Thank you, Miss Vaughn. I have not seen her this excited in a long while." "She is a wonderful student," Theresa said sincerely. "Bright and attentive. You should be very proud." "I am." He hesitated, then added, "I will have her here same time tomorrow. I will be ready." After they left, Theresa sank into her chair, letting the silence wash over her. She had done it. The first day was complete and it had gone well, better than well. The weeks that followed established a rhythm. Theresa taught with passion and creativity, and the children responded enthusiastically. She introduced them to literature, science experiments, and languages. She taught the older boys advanced mathematics and the girls proper grammar and composition. She made learning an adventure rather than a chore. Samuel brought Emma faithfully every morning and collected her every afternoon. He was always polite, always grateful, but Theresa began to notice that he seemed to linger longer each day. Their conversations grew from brief pleasantries to genuine discussions about Emma's progress, about teaching methods, about the challenges of frontier life. "She talks about you constantly," Samuel admitted one afternoon about 6 weeks into the term. "Miss Vaughn said this, Miss Vaughn taught us that. You have made quite an impression." Theresa felt warmth rise in her cheeks. She is an exceptional child, It is my privilege to teach her." "Still," Samuel said, his blue-gray eyes holding hers, "not every teacher would take such personal interest. Not every educated woman would see past the rough exterior of a mountain man's daughter to the bright girl underneath." "I see each child for who they are," Theresa replied. "Emma's circumstances do not diminish her worth or her potential." Samuel nodded slowly. "That is a rare quality, Miss Vaughn, seeing people for who they truly are rather than what they appear to be." There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that made Theresa's heart beat faster. She became acutely aware of how close they were standing, of the breadth of his shoulders, of the gentleness in his rough hands as he took Emma's small bag. "I should finish tidying up," Theresa said, breaking the moment. "Of course. Good evening, Miss Vaughn." "Good evening, Sam." She had started calling him Sam without quite realizing when the transition had occurred. It felt natural, comfortable, like so many things about him that should have been strange but somehow were not. October brought cooler weather and the first hints of the brutal winter to come. Theresa had been in Hill City for 2 months, and the school was thriving. Parents who had been skeptical now praised her methods. The children were learning at remarkable rates, and even the town council had to admit that hiring the educated Boston lady had been a wise decision. But Theresa was discovering that success in her professional life did not entirely fill the loneliness in her personal one. She had made friendly acquaintances among the townspeople, but no real friends. The women were kind but busy with their own families, and there was an unbridgeable gap between her education and theirs. She was respected but not quite accepted, admired but not quite understood. Samuel, oddly enough, seemed to understand her better than anyone. Despite his rough exterior and wilderness life, he was intelligent and thoughtful. He asked questions about her teaching methods, engaged seriously with her ideas, and treated her observations with respect. Their afternoon conversations had become the highlight of Theresa's day, though she tried not to examine too closely why that was. One Friday afternoon, in late October, Samuel arrived to collect Emma and found Theresa struggling to reach a high shelf where she was trying to store supplies. "Allow me," he said, and before she could protest, he had lifted the heavy box as if it weighed nothing and placed it exactly where she needed it. "Thank you," Theresa said, flustered by his proximity. He smelled of pine and wood smoke and leather, a scent that was becoming dangerously familiar. "You should not be climbing on chairs," Samuel said with mild reproach. "These old things are not stable." "I can manage," Theresa replied, a bit more sharply than she intended. "I have been managing on my own for quite some time." Samuel raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I did not mean to offend, just concerned for your safety." Theresa sighed, her irritation fading as quickly as it had sparked. "I apologize. I am simply tired. It has been a long week." "You work too hard," Samuel observed. "When do you rest? When the work is done." "And when is that?" Theresa laughed, a slightly brittle sound. "An excellent question." Emma had been playing quietly in the corner but now approached her father. "Papa, is Miss Vaughn coming to the harvest celebration tomorrow?" "I do not know, little one. That would be up to Miss Vaughn." Both sets of blue-gray eyes turned to Theresa expectantly. She had heard about the harvest celebration, a community gathering with food, music, and dancing, but had not planned to attend. Such events made her painfully aware of her outsider status. "I was not certain I would be welcome," Theresa admitted. "Not welcome?" Samuel looked genuinely surprised. "You are the teacher. Of course you would be welcome. The whole town will be there." "Please come, Miss Vaughn," Emma pleaded. "It is so much fun, and there is dancing and pie and everything." Theresa found herself unable to resist the child's enthusiasm or the quiet encouragement in Samuel's expression. "Very well. I will attend." Emma clapped her hands delightedly, and Samuel smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed his rugged face and made Theresa's breath catch. "Good," he said. "That is very good." The harvest celebration was held in a clearing at the edge of town, with tables laden with food and lanterns strung between the trees. The whole community had indeed turned out, and Theresa was greeted warmly by parents and children alike. She wore her best dress, a deep green silk that brought out her eyes, and had taken extra care with her hair. She told herself it was simply about making a good impression on the community, not about the possibility of seeing Samuel in a social setting. He arrived as the sun was setting, Emma skipping beside him. He had clearly made an effort as well, wearing clean trousers and a white shirt instead of his usual buckskins, though his long hair was still tied back in its leather cord. He looked simultaneously civilized and wild, and Theresa could not stop staring. "Miss Vaughn," Emma ran to her immediately. "You look so pretty." "Thank you, Emma. So do you." The girl wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, and her dark hair had been braided with obvious care. Samuel approached more slowly, his eyes taking in Theresa's appearance with obvious appreciation. "Miss Vaughn, you look lovely." "Thank you, Sam. You clean up rather well yourself," he laughed, a deep rumbling sound. "I do try on occasion." The evening was magical. Theresa found herself surrounded by students and parents, eating delicious food, watching the children play. Musicians struck up fiddle tunes, and people began to dance. Theresa watched from the sidelines, her foot tapping to the rhythm but not daring to join in. "You dance, Miss Vaughn." Samuel had appeared beside her, Emma now playing with other children nearby. "I do, though I suspect the dances I know are quite different from what is being performed here. Only one way to find out." He extended his hand, and Theresa's heart leaped into her throat. "I would not want to embarrass myself. I will not let you." There was such confidence in his voice, such quiet strength, that Theresa found herself placing her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but firm. He led her to where others were dancing and showed her the simple steps of the frontier reel. Theresa was naturally graceful and picked up the movements quickly, and soon they were spinning with the others, laughing as they went. Samuel was surprisingly light on his feet for such a large man, and he guided her through the dance with easy confidence. When the music shifted to something slower, he pulled her closer, one hand at her waist, and Theresa felt her entire body respond to his nearness. "You are a good dancer," she said, slightly breathless. "My wife, Emma's mother, she taught me, said even a mountain man should know how to dance properly." His voice grew soft with memory. "She was from France originally, came west with her missionary parents. That is why she wanted Emma to learn French. It was her way of holding on to her heritage. She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was. Samuel looked down at Theresa, his eyes intense in the lantern light. "She would have liked you, would have appreciated what you are doing for Emma." "I am honored to teach her." They danced in silence for a moment, and Theresa was intensely aware of every point where their bodies touched. She had danced with men before, at proper Boston balls with appropriate distance and decorum. This was different. This felt intimate and real and absolutely terrifying. "You never speak of why you came west," Samuel said quietly. "What brought an educated woman from Boston to the frontier?" Theresa stiffened slightly. "The opportunity to teach. There are schools in Boston. Probably finer schools than our rough little building." She was quiet for a long moment, debating how much to reveal. But there was something about Samuel, about the genuine interest in his eyes and the safety she felt in his arms, that made her want to be honest. My father made poor investments, she said finally. When his business collapsed, it created a scandal. The private academy where I taught could not afford to be associated with such controversy, so they dismissed me. Other schools in Boston would not hire me because of the taint to my family name. The West offered a fresh start, a place where my father's failures would not follow me. Samuel's hand tightened slightly at her waist, a gesture of comfort. That must have been difficult. It was humiliating, Theresa admitted. Everything I had worked for, my reputation, my position, all gone because of circumstances beyond my control. But perhaps it was for the best. I might never have discovered how much I love teaching children who truly need education, who hunger for knowledge rather than acquiring it as a social expectation. Their loss is our gain, Samuel said simply. You are exactly what this community needed, what Emma needed. The song ended and they stepped apart, though Theresa immediately missed the warmth of his touch. Emma ran up, demanding her father dance with her, and Theresa watched as Samuel swept his daughter into his arms and spun her around, making her giggle with delight. The love between them was so evident, so pure that Theresa felt tears prick her eyes. Later, as the celebration wound down and families began heading home, Samuel approached Theresa again. "Can I walk you back to your lodgings?" he asked. "That would be appreciated." They walked slowly through the quiet streets, Emma drowsing on her father's shoulder. The night air was crisp and clear, stars brilliant overhead in a way they never were in Boston. "Thank you for coming tonight," Samuel said. "It meant a lot to Emma having you there, meant a lot to me as well." "I enjoyed myself more than I expected," Theresa admitted. "Your community has been kinder to me than I perhaps deserved, given how I arrived full of judgments about frontier life. You have earned that kindness. You give everything to those children, ask nothing in return but their willingness to learn." They reached the boarding house, and Theresa turned to face him. In the moonlight, he looked almost mythical, this powerful man cradling his sleeping daughter with such tenderness. "Sam," she said softly, "may I ask you something? Anything? Why do you live so far from town? Why not settle closer, make life easier for yourself and Emma?" He was quiet for a moment, shifting Emma's weight. "After my wife died, I could not bear to be around people. The mountains were the only place my grief felt appropriate, where the vastness matched what I was feeling inside. And Emma, she was so young, and the wilderness was all she knew. I taught her everything I could, but I always knew it was not enough. When I heard about a new teacher coming, I knew it was time. Time to let Emma have more than just survival skills. Time to give her the education her mother would have wanted." "You are a good father," Theresa said, her voice thick with emotion. "I try." "It is not always easy, raising a daughter alone." "No," Theresa agreed. "I imagine not." They stood there in the moonlight, and Theresa felt the air between them charge with something unspoken. Samuel reached out with his free hand and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly soft. "Theresa," he said, using her given name for the first time, "you are an extraordinary woman." Then he stepped back, the moment breaking, and tipped his hat. "Good night, Miss Vaughn." "Good night, Sam." Theresa watched him walk away, her hand pressed to where his fingers had touched her face, her heart pounding so hard she was certain the entire town could hear it. November arrived with the first real cold, and Theresa began to understand what frontier winter truly meant. The wind cut through even her warmest clothing, and keeping the schoolhouse heated became a constant challenge. Samuel began arriving early in the mornings to help her build up the fire, staying to make sure it was burning properly before Emma started her lessons. "You do not have to do this," Theresa protested one particularly cold morning. "I can manage the fire." "I know you can," Samuel replied, stacking wood with practiced efficiency. "But there is no reason you should have to when I am capable of helping. You help quite enough already. You brought those extra blankets last week, and the firewood, and the supplies for winter projects with the children." Samuel shrugged, but Theresa saw the faint color in his cheeks. "The children need to stay warm and occupied, and you cannot do everything alone, no matter how stubborn you are." "I am not stubborn," Theresa protested. "You are magnificently stubborn," Samuel countered, a smile playing at his lips. "It is one of your more endearing qualities." They had fallen into an easy camaraderie these early morning moments before the students arrived. Sometimes they talked about Emma's progress, sometimes about the challenges of frontier life, sometimes about nothing important at all. Theresa treasured these conversations. The way Samuel listened to her opinions as if they truly mattered. The way he shared his own thoughts without condescension or mansplaining. One morning, as Samuel was preparing to leave, a fierce storm blew in with shocking speed. Within minutes, snow was falling so thickly that visibility dropped to almost nothing. "Blazes," Samuel muttered, looking out the window. "This came up fast. I need to get Emma somewhere safe." "She can stay here," Theresa said immediately. "It is warm and I have supplies." "You should not try to travel in this." "I have weathered worse storms," Samuel said, but even as he spoke, the wind howled so violently that the building shook. "Please," Theresa said, touching his arm, "do not risk it, for Emma's sake if not your own." Samuel looked down at where her hand rested on his forearm, then back at her face. "All right, we will wait it out." Other families had the same idea, and soon the schoolhouse was filled with parents and children seeking shelter from the sudden blizzard. Theresa organized everyone efficiently, making sure the smaller children were comfortable, helping mothers settle babies, keeping the fire roaring. Samuel helped her move desks to create more space, his strength making quick work of what would have taken her much longer. As the storm raged outside, Theresa found herself in the strange position of hosting most of the town in her schoolhouse. She made it into an impromptu lesson, teaching the children about weather patterns and the science of snow formation. The parents listened as well, drawn in by her clear explanations and obvious passion for knowledge. "You see," Theresa said, gesturing animatedly, "each snowflake is unique because of the specific atmospheric conditions it experiences as it falls. The temperature, the humidity, the air currents, all combine to create an infinite variety of crystalline structures." "Ain't that something?" one of the miners said, shaking his head in wonder. "Never knew there was science to it." "There is science to everything," Theresa replied with a smile. "The natural world operates on principles we are only beginning to understand. That is the beauty of education. The more we learn, the more we realize how much we do not know." Samuel watched from across the room, and when Theresa glanced his way, the pride in his expression made her heart soar. The storm finally broke late in the afternoon, and families began making their way home through the snowdrifts. Samuel and Emma were among the last to leave, and Theresa walked them to the door. "Thank you for keeping us safe," Samuel said quietly. "It was nothing. It was not nothing." His hand found hers, squeezed gently. "You took care of everyone today, made something frightening into an opportunity to learn. That is a gift, Theresa." Hearing him use her given name still sent shivers through her that had nothing to do with the cold. "I am just doing my job." "You are doing far more than that, and you know it." After they left, Theresa stood in the doorway for a long time, watching their figures disappear into the white landscape. She was falling for him, she realized. Falling for this gentle giant of a man with his rough edges and tender heart. Falling despite every rational reason not to. Despite the complications it would create, despite the risk of being hurt again. She was falling, and she was not sure she wanted to stop. December brought preparations for Christmas, and Theresa threw herself into organizing a holiday program for the school. The children would perform recitations, sing carols, and display their academic work for the community. It would be a showcase of everything they had learned and a celebration of how far they had come. Emma was especially excited, practicing her French recitation with fierce determination. "I want to make Papa proud," she confided to Theresa. "You already make him proud every single day," Theresa assured her. "But yes, he will be particularly proud when he hears how beautifully you speak French." Samuel had been coming to town more frequently, claiming he needed to stockpile supplies before the worst of winter set in. But Theresa noticed that his trips always seemed to coincide with the end of the school day, and he always found reasons to linger after collecting Emma. "I have been thinking," he said one afternoon, standing in the schoolhouse doorway as Emma played in the snow outside. "Winter gets harsh up in the mountains, too harsh for Emma to be making the trip to school every day once the real cold sets in." Theresa's heart sank. "You are taking her out of school." "No," Samuel said quickly. "The opposite. I was thinking Emma and I might move to town for the winter months. There is a small cabin available for rent. It would be easier on everyone." Relief flooded through Theresa so intensely that she had to sit down. "That would be wonderful. For Emma's education, I mean. Just for Emma's education." Samuel asked, and there was something in his voice that made Theresa look up sharply. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen before, vulnerable and hopeful and terrified all at once. "Sam," she began, but did not know how to finish. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his large, calloused ones. "Theresa, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." She nodded, unable to speak. "I know I am just a mountain man. I know I do not have your education or your refinement. I know I am rough around the edges and more comfortable with animals than people. But you have become the most important person in my world besides Emma. The way you care for her, the way you see her potential, the way you make learning an adventure instead of a chore. But more than that, the way you talk to me like I am your equal even though I barely know my letters. The way you listen when I talk about the mountains and the wilderness like it is as valuable as anything in your books. The way you make me want to be better, do better, learn more." "Sam," Theresa whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I am falling in love with you," he said simply. "Have been since that first day when you stood up to the whole town council and declared that education was the foundation of civilization. I am falling in love with your courage and your kindness and your stubborn insistence on seeing the good in everyone. And I know it is probably foolish, and I know you probably do not feel the same way about a rough man like me, but I had to tell you. Had to let you know that you matter, that you are valued for exactly who you are, not in spite of it." Theresa was crying in earnest now, but she was also laughing, joy bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "Oh, Sam, you wonderful, oblivious man." He looked confused, hopeful, terrified. "Theresa," she freed one of her hands and cupped his bearded cheek. "I have been falling in love with you too. Have been trying not to because it seemed so impossible, so unlikely. A Boston school teacher and a mountain man. What kind of sense does that make?" "All the sense in the world," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "We both see what matters. We both value what is real and true. We both understand that a person's worth is not determined by their circumstances, but by their character." "Kiss me," Theresa said, surprising herself with her boldness. Samuel needed no further invitation. He stood, pulling her up with him, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first and then deeper, more passionate. Theresa had been kissed before, chaste courtship kisses in Boston parlors, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Theresa Vaughn." "I love you too, Samuel Preston." A small cough from the doorway made them spring apart. Emma stood there, covered in snow, grinning from ear to ear. "Does this mean Miss Vaughn is going to be my new mama?" she asked hopefully. Samuel and Theresa looked at each other and burst out laughing. "We need to discuss some things first, little one," Samuel said gently. "But would you like that more than anything?" Emma launched herself at both of them, and they caught her in a three-way embrace that felt more right than anything Theresa had ever experienced. The Christmas program was a resounding success. Emma delivered her French recitation flawlessly, and Samuel watched from the front row with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. All the children performed beautifully, and the community left singing the praises of their learned teacher. Afterward, as Theresa was cleaning up, Samuel approached with something behind his back. "I made you something," he said, suddenly shy. "It is not fancy, not like what you are probably used to, but I wanted you to have it." He presented her with a small wooden box, intricately carved with flowers and vines. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail perfect. "Sam," Theresa breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "This is beautiful. You made this during the long winter nights in the mountains." "I have been working on it since I first met you." Inside the box was a ring, simple silver with a small stone. "It was my wife's," Samuel said quietly. "She would want Emma to have a mother who loved her, who valued education and kindness and truth. She would want me to be happy again." "Theresa, will you marry me?" "Yes," Theresa said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in early January of 1877 in the same schoolhouse where they had fallen in love. The whole town attended, celebrating the union of their educated teacher and the mountain man who had won her heart. Emma was flower girl, scattering dried wildflowers that Samuel had collected and preserved from the mountain meadows. Theresa moved into the cabin Samuel had rented in town, though they planned to build a house in the spring. Emma delighted in having a mother again, and Theresa discovered that loving this child came as naturally as breathing. Samuel surprised everyone, including himself, by asking Theresa to teach him to read and write properly. "If I am married to an educated woman," he said, "I should be educated too." They spent evenings together, Theresa patiently teaching Samuel while Emma practiced her own lessons. He proved to be a quick learner, hungry for knowledge the way his daughter was. Within months, he was reading books on his own, devouring everything from adventure stories to scientific texts. "I never knew there was so much I did not know," he marveled one night, looking up from a book on natural philosophy. "All this time, I was living in the wilderness but not really understanding it, not the way I do now." "You understood it in ways I never could," Theresa countered. "Through experience and observation and instinct. The books just give you different language for what you already knew." Their partnership worked beautifully because they valued each other's strengths without diminishing their own. Samuel taught Theresa about survival skills, about reading weather patterns from animal behavior, about moving quietly through the forest. Theresa taught Samuel about literature, science, and the wider world beyond the mountains. They learned together, grew together, and fell deeper in love with each passing day. In the classroom, Theresa's reputation continued to grow. Students who had barely known their letters were now reading complex texts and solving advanced mathematical problems. She began teaching Spanish in addition to French, opening up new worlds to children who might never travel beyond South Dakota, but who could now communicate across cultures. The 3 languages she spoke, which had once intimidated the townspeople, became a source of pride for the community. They bragged about their educated teacher, about how their children could speak French and Spanish, about the quality of education available even in Rough Hill City. "We were fools to be intimidated," the mayor admitted to Samuel one day. "What we needed was exactly what she offered. Someone who could teach our children well, prepare them for a world bigger than these mountains." "That is what I try to tell everyone," Samuel replied with a grin. "But nobody listens to a mountain man. Spring brought new beginnings." Samuel and several townsmen built a house on the edge of town, close enough for Theresa to walk to school, but with a view of the mountains Samuel loved. It was modest but well built, with a large room for Emma and a study where Theresa could prepare lessons and Samuel could read in the evenings. They planted a garden together, Emma helping enthusiastically if not always effectively. Theresa taught classes during the day and came home to a husband who greeted her with warmth and affection, who asked about her day and cared about the answers, who valued her mind as much as her heart. In May, Theresa discovered she was pregnant. Samuel's joy was so complete that he picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "You, me, and Emma, we are going to have a baby." Emma was equally thrilled at the prospect of being an older sister. "I will teach the baby everything I know," she declared. "And when they are old enough, they can come to school with me and learn from Mama too. We will be the most educated family in South Dakota," Theresa said, laughing. The baby, a boy they named Simon, was born in January of 1878, healthy and strong. Samuel was a devoted father, tending to his son with the same gentle care he showed Emma. Theresa took a brief leave from teaching, but the community was so supportive that she was able to return within weeks, with several mothers taking turns watching Simon during school hours. Emma doted on her baby brother, reading to him in French and English, showing him her schoolwork, telling him about everything she was learning. "You are going to be so smart, Simon," she would whisper, "just like Mama and Papa and me." As Simon grew, Theresa and Samuel added 2 more children to their family. A daughter they named Sarah in 1880 and another son, Samuel Jr., in 1882. The house rang with laughter and learning, with Samuel reading bedtime stories in his deep voice while Theresa nursed the baby, with Emma helping her younger siblings with their letters, with all of them gathered around the table for lessons and meals and life. Samuel never returned to living full-time in the mountains, though he still hunted and trapped occasionally. He had discovered that what he loved about the wilderness was the peace and the beauty, and he could find that in his family just as well. He became a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and helping build a larger schoolhouse, when Theresa's classes grew too big for the original building. Emma grew into a brilliant young woman, fluent in 3 languages by the time she was 15, with ambitions to become a teacher like her mother. "You gave me the gift of education," she told Theresa one evening. "I want to give that gift to others." "You will be magnificent," Theresa assured her, her heart swelling with pride. By 1885, Hill City had transformed from a rough mining town into a thriving community, in no small part due to Theresa's influence. The children she had taught were growing into educated, thoughtful adults who valued knowledge and curiosity. Several had gone on to higher education, something that would have been unthinkable before she arrived. On their 8th anniversary, Samuel took Theresa back to the schoolhouse where they had fallen in love. It was summer break, and the building was empty and quiet. "You remember that first day," Samuel asked, pulling her close. "When I told you Emma needed someone who could teach her well. I remember you saying that some men were intimidated by my education," Theresa replied with a smile, "but that you saw it as exactly what the children needed." "I was right," Samuel said. "You have given Emma, given all the children, given me the most precious gift. You opened up entire worlds we did not know existed. You gave me something too," Theresa said softly. "You showed me that education and learning are not just for the elite in their fancy Boston schools. That hunger for knowledge exists everywhere, in mountain men and miners' children and frontier towns. You made me a better teacher by helping me see that." "We make each other better," Samuel said, kissing her forehead. "That is what love is supposed to do." They stood together in the quiet schoolhouse, this man of the mountains and this woman of the cities, who had found in each other something neither had known they were missing. Outside, the South Dakota wilderness stretched endlessly, wild and beautiful. Inside, they had built something just as wild and infinitely more precious. Their love story became legend in Hill City. The educated teacher who spoke 3 languages and the mountain man who recognized that education was the key to his daughter's future. The woman who had fled scandal in Boston and found purpose in the frontier. The man who had hidden his grief in the wilderness and found healing in a schoolroom. Years later, when Emma opened her own school in a neighboring town, she told her students about her mother and father. About how her papa had brought her to school that first day, nervous but determined. About how he had said that Miss Vaughn could teach their children well, even though some men were intimidated by all that learning. "Education is not something to fear," Emma would tell her students. "It is something to embrace." My father, a mountain man with no formal schooling, understood that better than most educated people. He saw that knowledge was power, that language was a bridge, that teaching our children well was the most important investment we could make. And at home, Samuel and Theresa grew old together, surrounded by children and grandchildren, by books and laughter and love. Samuel never stopped learning, reading everything he could get his hands on, discussing philosophy and science with Theresa late into the night. Theresa never stopped teaching, her passion for education burning as bright at 60 as it had at 22. They had started with a mountain man looking for a teacher for his daughter and an educated woman looking for a fresh start. They had built a love that transformed not just their own lives, but an entire community. They had proven that unlikely combinations could create the most beautiful results, that love could bridge any gap, that 2 people who saw and valued each other for exactly who they were could build something extraordinary. In the end, what intimidated those men in the beginning became Hill City's greatest pride. The teacher who spoke 3 languages had taught their children well, had raised a family with a mountain man, had shown them all that education and frontier toughness were not opposites, but complements. That knowledge and survival skills, books and wilderness, refinement and roughness could all exist together, could all be valued together. And every time Theresa looked at Samuel, still strong and protective even with gray in his hair, she remembered that first afternoon when he had stood in the shadows and told her that his daughter needed someone who could teach their children well. She remembered thinking that this rough mountain man understood the value of education better than most civilized people she had known. She had been right. And in understanding that value, in seeking it out for his daughter, Samuel had given Theresa the greatest gift of all. He had given her a place where her talents were not just accepted, but celebrated, where her 3 languages and her education were not intimidating but inspiring, where she could be exactly who she was and be loved for it. Together they had built a legacy that would last generations. Their children and grandchildren carried on the tradition of valuing both education and practical wisdom, of seeing worth in all kinds of knowledge, of never being intimidated by learning but always embracing it. And it had all started with a mountain man who was not afraid of an educated woman, who saw her brilliance as a gift rather than a threat, who understood that she could teach their children well, who loved her not in spite of her intelligence but because of it, who valued her mind as much as her heart, who grew alongside her instead of trying to diminish her. That was the real love story. Not just a romance between two unlikely people, but a celebration of mutual respect, of complementary strengths, of seeing and valuing each other completely. It was a love that built families and communities, that changed lives and opened worlds, that proved that the best partnerships were those where both people could be fully themselves and be loved all the more for it. As Theresa and Samuel sat on their porch in their twilight years, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, speaking to each other in that mixture of languages they had made their own, they knew they had found something rare and precious. They had found a love that was both wild and gentle, both challenging and comfortable, both unexpected and exactly right. "I love you," Samuel would say in English or French or Spanish, and Theresa would smile. "I love you too," she would reply, "always and forever." And the mountains would stand watch over their happiness, silent witnesses to a love story that began with intimidation and ended with inspiration, that started with a search for a teacher and became so much more. A love story that proved that the most unlikely combinations could create the most beautiful results, and that seeing someone's true worth was the greatest gift one person could give another. Their story became part of Hill City's history, told and retold, embellished and celebrated. The teacher who spoke 3 languages and the mountain man who recognized her value. The educated woman from Boston and the wilderness man who made her feel at home. The unlikely love that transformed a community and built a legacy that would endure for generations. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Samuel had known from the beginning. Education was not something to fear but something to embrace, and the right teacher could change everything. Theresa had been that teacher, for Emma and for him and for an entire town. And in return, Samuel had taught Theresa that love could be found in the most unexpected places, with the most unlikely people, and that being valued for exactly who you were was the greatest romance of all. Their love story was complete, their lives full, their legacy secure. And as they held hands on that porch, surrounded by the family they had built and the community they had helped shape, they knew that they had found something truly rare. Not just love, but partnership. Not just passion, but respect. Not just romance, but a meeting of minds and hearts that had enriched both their lives beyond measure. The mountain man and the teacher. The rough wilderness and refined education. The unlikely pair who had proven that love knows no boundaries, that respect is the foundation of true romance, and that when two people truly see each other, truly value each other, they can build something that will last forever. And that, in the end, was the greatest lesson of all.